Hello and welcome to our roundtable panel discussion today on shale gas, hosted by the global energy recruitment agency Spencer Ogden here in central London.
Shale gas can provide a very useful and significant part of Britain's energy needs.
In the US, if somebody is developing shale on your land, you have a direct economic benefit, whereas in the UK, that goes to the Treasury. And I think that's been a major motivator and a major factor in just the speed at which shale has been taken up in the US.
A couple of thoughts about population density. I mean, it's certainly true that the UK is much more densely populated than the US, but our population tends to be concentrated in towns and cities. You've got about 80% of the population living on about 7% of the land. And in the UK, obviously, you're going to have a lot of rural areas where you've got farmland, and again, you don't have very many houses around where you might have drilling activity.
I've been involved in shale gas in North America for quite a long time, and I'm invested quite heavily in it. And it's my conclusion that the UK is very unlikely to reproduce the US shale revolution. All shales are not alike. They need to have low V clay, and they need to be shatterable. And this is not a very common thing. Who gets the royalty is a very important point. In the US, you want the rigs to come onto your land because you get the royalty, and the opposite is true.
What do you say to the government's paper on community benefits?
Well, we'll see what happens on that, because certainly it is a very important aspect that the communities, local people, have got to have an involvement. And right now, I think there's quite a lot of sensitivity, not just to this area, but other sorts of energy generation as well. Gas is here to stay as far as generation, as far as heating our houses are concerned. Yeah, we might have some changes, but it's there. Do we want energy security, more energy security in this country or not? And clearly, we do want more energy security. So with this particular issue of shale, what we think needs to happen is, first of all, a proper assessment of what we've got, and then following that with a proper assessment of how much of it is extractable. Local communities have to be involved in that, but until we've got those basic facts in place, you can't actually make the decisions.
Now, if we're looking at the environmental concerns as we are at the moment...
And you can rule out flaring, and you can say you would be happy to accept regulations on green completions.
Well, you with the green agenda would rather we flared it than invented it to the atmosphere. So in fact, controlling the flaring is a much more important part of the equation.
So there'll be no flaring in this country?
No, there's flaring at the moment in this country.
No,
there's
onshore flaring at fracking sites in Sussex. Will there be no
there may well
flaring?
Be. No,
there may well be.
If you're lucky and you find something.
What there mustn't be is...
So there may well be flaring in the home counties.
What there mustn't be, the real environmental damage is venting of methane into the atmosphere. And the three big environmental issues for shale gas fracking are, firstly, can there be any contamination of groundwater from the fracking fluids? Secondly, can there be any venting of methane into the atmosphere? And thirdly, what happens to the wastewater once it gets onto the surface? Those are the three big environmental issues. All three are absolutely possible for secure environmental treatment.
The Committee on Climate Change in April, which said that as long as it was properly regulated, domestic shale gas should produce lower carbon emissions than imported LNG. And also there was another study for the European Commission a couple of years ago which also concluded the same thing. So it's all about whether or not you put in place proper controls. Basically,
if the US had ever signed up to Kyoto, they'd have now met their Kyoto objectives in a way in which the rest of the world would have required them, or would love them to have done, as a consequence directly of shale gas in the US making a move away from the burning of coal. Secondly, if you're going to burn any hydrocarbon, and we all realise that we'd rather we didn't have to, but if we've got to use hydrocarbons, you're better using gas than you are using oil, and you're better using gas than you are using coal. And if you're going to use gas, you're much better to use gas which is sourced close to home.
I think you do need to look at the bigger picture, and the bigger picture, is it more environmentally sensible to produce shale gas in the US, freeze it, ship it, unfreeze it and use it here, or produce gas here if it's economically viable?
It's a straw man argument.
I think
nobody's proposing that we do that.
Well, that's exactly what is going to happen.
If the world believes that the benefits of addressing climate change are worth achieving, put a price on carbon, be at a European level by 2015. Hopefully there'll be some kind of international agreement, and if if the economics work, coal will come out bottom of the stack. Gas will be next best, and if the cost curve for renewables keeps coming down, then they will rise to the top of the stack.
So I think we actually have to take a very sensible, very practical view about the transition. And the key area which I would like to see money spent on is on the carbon capture and storage. Because there seems to be a lot of talk about carbon capture and storage, a lot of promise, but the actual investment to see just exactly how economic it is at commercial levels has not taken place. And that is an important part of this whole future jigsaw.
Do you think the potential to create jobs in the energy sector actually outweighs some of the environmental risks? Or do you think that actually most of those jobs are parachuted in and they aren't actually local jobs?
What it could do is repatriate a lot of the skills that are now working overseas in the Gulf of Mexico, Singapore, back to the UK because they have the skills, the particular skills for drilling, as well as there's an enormous amount of infrastructure around it, whether it's in project offices, transportation. It creates a lot of jobs, and that isn't a big impact on a local community, which is a positive.
I'm interested in this idea that local communities ought to benefit more so than any other citizen from if fracking does occur. If it is a common resource, which it isn't in the States, why should people get more bobbies on the beat and more primary school teachers simply because they're within 3 or 4 miles of a fracking rig when I don't?
One of my own views about it is that, first of all, this has to be established by state regulation. I don't think it should be by negotiation between the authorities, between the companies and the local communities or the local authority. We should be looking at providing for a percentage of the actual shareholding of the companies to be handed to local communities. And they have a member on the board, and therefore they get both the capital element and a dividend flow.
I think there are useful lessons to be learned from other industries, like the onshore wind industry, for example, which a couple of years ago devised a community benefits protocol, which was designed to say, here's a minimum amount we will pay per megawatt of installed capacity. So you would try and avoid that problem of some communities getting more than others.
We, as an industry, believe that we should allow communities to benefit in some form, to be debated and proposed, but also they should also have the ability of putting in place what they want to see from community benefits, and for it not to be imposed by the industry or by government, but through a form of consultation that we agree what they want to see as well, because I think that's very, very important.
We don't know whether or not the shales in this country will flow or not, but I think the central tenet of my position is the country deserves to find out whether they do or don't, and whether or not we can actually make that work. Yeah? And actually, most of the other debates about where the community benefits go, where the taxation system goes, etc., actually all ride on whether or not we can make the stuff flow out the ground at the right kind of rates. And I think where us and others are looking is, let's just get ourselves into a place where we can put a few wells down and actually see whether or not it works. If it doesn't work, the rest of the conversation is entirely academic.